My name isn't really Michael Reed, but that's the name I'll use with you tonight. I don't know where you are listening to this from, or what you believe, but I want you to know this. If you had met me years ago, you would never have imagined that the man people once called Hollywood's atheist would one day lie on a hospital bed, whispering the name of Allah. Before the hospital room, before the diagnosis, before the quiet nights of fear and reflection, there was a boy in a small American town who slowly stopped believing in God. That's where my story really begins. I grew up in one of those Midwestern towns where the sky feels too big and life feels too small. There were cornfields, wide streets, and the same faces every Sunday morning filing into the same little white church on the hill. The building smelled like old wood and furniture polish. The air was always just a bit too warm, thick with cheap perfume, and the sweetness of over-sugared coffee drifting in from the fellowship hall. I remember sitting there on those wooden pews with my feet not quite touching the floor, listening to the pastor talk about God's love, judgment, heaven and hell, often all in the same sermon. The adults nodded and whispered amen at the right moments. For them, everything seemed simple. God loved us. We should obey him. If we didn't, there was hell. If we did, there was heaven. Straight lines, clear rules, neatly packaged answers. But even as a kid, those answers felt thin, like wallpaper covering cracks. I was the annoying child with too many questions. If God loves everyone, why would he create a place like hell? If God listens to prayers, why did my neighbor's baby die? My neighbor? If God is close, why does he feel so far from me? I didn't ask to provoke anyone. I was honestly confused. I wanted something that made sense in my head and sat peacefully in my heart. Instead, I got tight smiles and the same reply over and over. Some things you just have to accept by faith, Michael. Faith. At first, the word sounded beautiful. After a while, it began to feel like a door being gently but firmly closed in my face. Don't ask. Don't dig. Don't disturb what keeps everyone comfortable. Then Jacob died. He was a boy from our street, a little older than me. We weren't best friends, but we rode bikes together, shared stupid jokes, and pretended our small town was a big world we were racing through. One afternoon, a car came around the corner too fast. There was the squeal of tires, a heavy thud, the sharp sound of someone screaming. Then there was silence. At his funeral, the church was packed. Adults spoke in hushed tones. God called him home, one woman said. God needed another angel. Another whispered, dabbing at her eyes. I sat there, staring at the small casket, my hands balled into fists, hearing those phrases like someone scratching on glass. So God needed him more than his family did? God took him home and left an empty room, an empty chair at the dinner table, a mother with red, swollen eyes? If this was love, it felt twisted. That night, I stood in my dark bedroom, facing the ceiling as if the plaster might peel away and reveal some grand truth behind it. If you're really there, I whispered, this is a strange way to show love. I waited. No warmth, no voice, no sign. Just the whirring fan above me, its blades chopping the air with a slow, indifferent rhythm. I was 12 when I finally said it out loud. It was a regular evening. My dad was half watching a crime show in his recliner, and my mom was folding laundry on the couch. The TV light flickered over their faces in shades of blue and gray. My heart pounded, but my voice came out almost calm. I don't think I believe in God. My mom's hands froze mid-fold. My dad reached for the remote and muted the TV. The room felt oddly loud in its silence. "What did you say, son?" he asked, though he'd heard me perfectly. "I don't think I believe in God," I repeated, more quietly this time. I braced myself for anger, for a lecture, for threats of hellfire and disappointment. Instead, my dad let out a long, heavy sigh, like air escaping a balloon. My mom blinked quickly, eyes shining with tears she didn't want to release. "Just don't say that in front of your grandparents," she murmured. Then my dad turned the sound back on, and the detective on the screen got his clear answers and neat resolution by the time the credits rolled. My doubt stayed. It sat between us, unspoken, like a shadow no one acknowledged. From then on, I started to feel like a stranger in that little church. I still went sometimes, for my parents' sake, but my heart wasn't there. While the pastor preached about faith and trust and surrender, I felt myself stepping further and further away inside. In my teenage years, I found other books, science, philosophy, sharp-tongued atheists who used logic the way surgeons use scalpels. They dissected belief, cut through traditions, and questioned everything without apologizing. Their arguments made sense to me. They didn't ask me to stop thinking. They demanded that I think more. I soaked in their words like a dry sponge dropped into water. Religion, they said, was a story one told by frightened people who couldn't face death or randomness. For the first time, I felt like I had a framework that matched what I saw in the world. Cruelty, beauty, chaos, and no clear hand arranging it all. If I began to worship anything, it wasn't disbelief, it was certainty. The relief of feeling sure. I started to look back at that little white church and see not a sanctuary, but a stage where adults recited lines they'd inherited from their parents, who had inherited them from theirs. Around this time, I discovered the place that would become my new sanctuary, the local movie theater. The carpet was stained, the seats squeaked, the air smelled like popcorn and syrupy soda. But when the lights dimmed and the screen lit up, something in me came alive. On that glowing rectangle, people struggled with the same questions I had, but through story, not sermons. Characters doubted, believed, lost, loved, raged at the heavens, or walked away from faith entirely, and somehow, even in their confusion, they were allowed to be human. I'd walk home in the dark afterward, my head buzzing. No one in those stories told the questioning character to just have faith. They wrestled, they failed, they changed. It felt honest. I wanted to create that. I wanted to tell stories where people like me could exist without being the villain or the cautionary tale. So I wrote, not prayers, but dialogue, not psalms, but scenes. In the dim yellow circle of my desk lamp, in a messy bedroom in a town that felt too small for my questions, I scribbled in notebooks until my hand cramped. If I asked for anything back then, it wasn't paradise, it was escape. Let me out of here, I thought. Let me tell my stories. The acceptance letter from a film school in Los Angeles arrived on a gray afternoon. My fingers shook as I opened it at the kitchen table. My mom hovered anxiously, drying a plate that didn't really need drying. My dad sat across from me, pretending to be calm. "Dear Michael, congratulations," it said. "Film school, Hollywood, a door into the world I'd imagined in dark cinemas." My mom burst into tears and hugged me. My dad squeezed my shoulder so hard it hurt, saying, "I'm proud of you, son." That night, standing in my bedroom doorway, my mother added softly, "Just don't forget God out there, okay?" I smiled politely. Inside, I thought, out there, I won't need him at all. Hollywood didn't welcome me with red carpets. It welcomed me with noise, heat, and rent I could barely pay. My first apartment was a small box with peeling paint and a window that faced a brick wall. Sirens wailed at night. Someone was always arguing outside. The city hummed like a living thing, refusing to sleep. I loved it. It felt raw, real, alive, like the opposite of those quiet, scripted Sundays back home. Film school was a storm. Everyone was brilliant in their own head. Everyone had a script that would change the world. We stayed up late in cramped kitchens, debating art, morality, meaning. God came up often, sometimes as a sincere question, sometimes as a punchline. Some still believed, carefully, like people holding fragile glass. Others, like me, wore unbelief, like a leather jacket, confident and loud. I refined my skepticism into something sharp. It wasn't enough to say, I don't believe in God. I had to say why, the way a good script doesn't just tell you something, it shows you. My first big break came with a script about a young man breaking away from a strict religious family. It wasn't subtle. It was angry, raw, almost cruel, but it was honest to how I felt at the time. The studio loved it. They called it courageous, uncompromising, a necessary critique. Critics praised it. Suddenly, my name started circulating emails, meetings, rooms I never thought I'd be in. I became, slowly, that guy. The writer who wasn't afraid to go after religion. The one you call if you want sharp dialogue and no sacred cows. Interviews followed, panels, late-night segments. Hosts smiled and asked, "So, Michael, you don't believe in God at all?" I'd smirk, sip water, and reply, "I believe in deadlines. They're the only thing that always shows up." The audience laughed, and I played my role. With every chuckle, every approving nod, the label sank deeper. Hollywood's atheist, the fearless skeptic, the man who had outgrown God. As the years passed, my life upgraded. Bigger apartments, nicer cars, restaurant tables you had to book weeks in advance. My younger self would have looked at that life and thought, "You did it. You proved you don't need God." On the outside, I was succeeding. On the inside, I didn't think about the inside too much. It was easier to keep moving, keep writing, keep talking. Then my body started to slow down before my mind did. At first, it was just exhaustion that didn't match the hours I worked. Shortness of breath on stairs that used to be easy. A heaviness in my limbs I blamed on stress, late nights, too much coffee. I'll rest after this project, I told myself. After this premiere, after this award season, but rest kept being postponed, and the fatigue kept growing. There were little things, a cough that stayed, bruises that appeared, without reason, clothes getting looser without me trying. Friends joked that I was getting old. My assistant nagged me to see a doctor. I brushed it off with the same confidence I used to brush off questions about God. But one evening, walking from my office to my car, my vision blurred and the world tilted. I had to lean against the wall until the dizziness passed. Looking down at my own shaking hands, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Fear that wouldn't disappear with a clever line. So I made the appointment. The clinic was all white walls and sterile smells. I sat on the paper-covered exam table, listening to it crinkle under me every time I shifted. The doctor flipped through my results with a seriousness that made the room feel smaller. His face was careful, professional, but there was a softness in his eyes that made my stomach drop. "Michael," he began, his voice measured, "we found some concerning signs in your tests." He talked about irregularities in my blood work, shadows on scans, things that shouldn't be there. My ears started to ring. Then he said the word that cut through all the noise: cancer. He kept talking about biopsies, stages, treatment options, timelines, but his words felt distant, like they were coming from the other end of a long, dark tunnel. I'd written scenes like this before. I'd put actors in hospital gowns, handed them tragic diagnoses, scored their reactions with somber music. But now, there was no script, no director, no retakes. Just me, sitting on a crinkling paper sheet, realizing that my body had been quietly betraying me while I was busy making fun of faith. This story is inspired by true events. It's told with deep respect for all faiths, and meant only to share one man's journey toward finding peace in Islam. From which country are you watching this video? Subscribe to this channel if you love Islam. I walked out of that clinic holding a folder full of test orders and pamphlets I didn't want to read. The sun outside was too bright, the traffic too loud, the world strangely unchanged. People checked their phones, argued in parking lots, sipped coffee, laughed, cursed at red lights. Everything looked normal. But inside me, something had shifted forever. For years I had stood on stages and in studios, certain that death was just a blackout, lights off. Nothing more. Now, as the word cancer echoed in my mind, certainty didn't feel so solid. For the first time since I was that 12-year-old boy in the living room, my heart whispered a question I couldn't easily bury under jokes and work. What if I'm wrong? That question would lead me down a path I never expected, a path that would bring me face to face with my own fragility, with the idea of meeting the one I had mocked, and with a name I had long associated with other people's prayers, Allah. But that part of the journey comes next. I didn't tell the world I had cancer. When you spend your life performing a certain version of yourself in public, you learn quickly what to hide. And this felt like the one thing I wasn't ready for anyone to see. On paper, I was still Michael Reed, Hollywood's atheist, the sharp-tongued screenwriter who made fun of faith and walked away with awards. Online, people still quoted my lines about how death was just the final blackout. They still tagged me in memes about religion. They still thought I was untouchable. Meanwhile, my body was quietly falling apart. Only a few people knew at first. My doctor, obviously. My assistant, Emma, because she handled my schedule and noticed the hospital appointments. My agent, because he needed to know why I suddenly started saying no to long shoots and extended press tours. My parents, because how do you not tell the two people who watched you take your first breath that you might be running out of them? Everyone else just thought I was taking a break to focus on writing. Hollywood loves that phrase. It sounds artistic, not terrifying. Chemo was nothing like the darkly poetic version I'd written in scripts. There was no soft music in the background, no perfect monologue about life. There was fluorescent lighting and the sharp smell of antiseptic. There were plastic chairs and thin blankets that never quite kept you warm. There was the cold bite of the IV needle sliding into my arm. The metallic taste that rose in my throat when the drugs started flowing. I'd sit there in a row of strangers, all of us hooked up to our own bags of poison, pretending not to notice how sick we looked. Some read books. Some scrolled through their phones. Some stared at nothing. I watched the clear drip above me and thought, this is the closest thing I've ever had to faith believing in something I can't see, hoping it saves me, while it makes me weak. My hair started to thin. I'd always been proud of it, stupid as that sounds. It was part of the image. The confident writer with the slightly messy, I don't care look. That actually took effort. One morning in the shower, I ran my hand through it and came away with a small clump. I stared at it, stuck to my wet palm, my heart suddenly pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the disease. "This is really happening," I whispered to the empty bathroom. There was no reply, just the hiss of the water and the dull ache in my chest. I made a decision early on. No public announcement, no dramatic post, no neatly worded press statement about sharing my journey. It wasn't about bravery or shame. It was about control. If I couldn't control what was happening inside my body, at least I could control who got to know. So, I worked. In between treatments, when the nausea settled and the dizziness faded just enough, I wrote. My laptop became a kind of anchor. As long as I could still create, I could pretend I was more than the shrinking man in the mirror. The irony was almost comical. The scripts they loved the most during that period were the darkest ones. Stories about mortality, the absurdity of life, the emptiness of searching for meaning where there is none. Reviews called them ruthless, uncompromising, fearlessly nihilistic. If only they knew. At home, on the days after chemo, when my bones hummed with fatigue and my stomach turned at the thought of food, I'd lie on my couch and scroll through messages from fans. People thanked me for liberating them from religion, for making it easier to stop being afraid of death. Some of them joked, "If hell is real, you and I are both going." I used to laugh at that. Now it just sat there on the screen, heavy. I'd roll the word around in my head, hell, and tell myself it was just a relic of a language I no longer spoke. But the truth was, it didn't feel as distant as it used to. My parents reacted in the way I knew they would. My mother cried so hard over the phone I had to pretend I was fine just to get her to breathe normally again. My dad went quiet, like he always did, when he didn't know what to do. A week later, my mom texted me that their church had started a prayer chain for me. People I hadn't seen in years were apparently mentioning my name in their conversations with God. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to scoff. They're wasting their time talking to the ceiling. Another part of me felt strangely touched. These were people whose faith I had walked away from, whose values I had mocked on screen. And yet, when they heard I was sick, their first instinct was to turn to the very God I'd spent my career dismissing and say, "Please, help him." I didn't know what to do with that. Then there was Hollywood. When you don't tell people you're sick, they make their own assumptions. Some thought I was just being difficult. Others assumed I was burnt out or having some kind of midlife crisis. A few joked that I'd finally run out of opinions. At parties on the rare nights I had the energy to show up, people would clap me on the back and say, "We miss your brutal takes on religion, man. When's the next script?" I'd smile, raise my glass, and ignore the way my hand trembled around the stem. The anger came in waves. Sometimes, lying awake at 3 in the morning with pain crawling under my skin, I'd stare at the ceiling again, like I had as a child. Only this time, the words in my chest were different. Not a question, but an accusation. "If you're there," the thought stopped itself, like it hit a wall. "No, there is no you. This is just cells, mutations, biology, randomness." I repeated those words like a mantra. I tried to make them feel like comfort the way they once had, but in the lonely dark, with my body reminding me of its limits, they didn't comfort me, they just left an echo. One afternoon during chemo, a new nurse came over to check my drip. She wore a plain headscarf, neatly pinned, and a badge that said Layla. Her movements were gentle but efficient, the kind of calm you can't fake. She asked how I was feeling, and I gave my usual answer, like a truck hit me and then backed up for a second pass. She smiled politely. As she adjusted the IV, I noticed her lips moving silently. At first, I thought she was counting under her breath. Then I heard just a hint of a familiar word, one I'd only ever heard in headlines and movies. Ya Allah. It was so soft I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Did you just pray?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She looked up, a little startled, then nodded. "I just ask Allah to make it easier for you," she said, simply. I wanted to say something clever, something dismissive, the old Michael Reed line, mocking the invisible God of a religion that wasn't mine, but the words dried up on my tongue. Instead, I asked, "Does it help?" Layla gave a small smile. "It helps me," she said, "and sometimes he helps too." She moved on to the next patient. I stared at the IV tube, thinking about how casually she'd said it Allah, as if she was talking about someone she actually knew, someone present in this freezing room full of sick, exhausted people. I'd built a career on the idea that God was a human invention, a crutch, a story. But sitting there, weak and wired to a drip, I felt a strange kind of envy. Not for her religion, I wasn't ready to go there, but for her certainty, for the way she walked through suffering with a name on her tongue that seemed to steady her. This story is inspired by true events. It's told with deep respect for all faiths and meant only to share one man's journey toward finding peace in Islam. From which country are you watching this video? Subscribe to this channel if you love Islam. The treatments went on. Time blurred into a routine of hospitals, pills, scans, and short-lived bursts of normal life in between. Projects slowed down, but didn't stop. My agent shielded me from some demands, but work kept finding me. I kept writing, and the world kept consuming what I produced, unaware that the hands typing those words sometimes shook so badly I had to pause and breathe. Occasionally, late at night, I'd open a blank browser tab and type things I never thought I'd search. What happens when you die? What do different religions say about death? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then backed away. I'd close the tab before hitting enter. It felt like betrayal of the image I'd built, of the certainty I'd preached. Still, questions moved in, quietly. Persistence is a quality I'd always admired in writers and directors. I hadn't expected to see it in doubt. One night, after a particularly brutal round of chemo, I ended up in the ER. Complications, they called it. Fever spiking, heart racing, numbers on machines that made doctors frown. I remember being half-conscious, hearing snatches of conversation, blood pressure dropping, "Get another line in. We need to move quickly." In that haze, something inside me broke open. I wasn't thinking about interviews or scripts or my reputation as the fearless atheist. I wasn't thinking at all, really. I was just scared. More scared than I had ever let myself admit. And in that fear, a thought rose, uninvited and uncontrollable. If there is anyone out there, anyone, please, don't let it end like this. I didn't use the word God. I didn't say Allah. It wasn't eloquent or theological. It was raw, wordless, pleading. A drowning man, reaching for a hand he wasn't even sure existed. Later, when things stabilized and they moved me back to a regular room, I told myself it meant nothing. Just the brain's reaction to panic. Old childhood wiring, firing in a crisis. But deep down, I knew that moment had crossed a line I'd drawn for myself years ago. Some days after that, I sat alone in my apartment, city lights flickering outside, laptop screen glowing in front of me. For the first time, I typed a different kind of search. Not about philosophy, not about criticism, not about atheism. I typed, "What do Muslims believe about death and mercy?" My finger hovered over the enter key. My heart thudded slowly in my chest, heavy and deliberate, reminding me that it was still there, still beating, still capable of stopping. Everything in my public persona, everything I had said on stages and in interviews, screamed at me to close the laptop, to stay in the safety of my old certainty, to keep mocking from a distance. But the man with cancer, the man who had whispered a desperate plea in the ER, just stared at that blinking cursor and thought, if I'm already this close to the edge, what am I really afraid of finding? In the end, I pressed enter. The screen filled with words I'd never taken seriously before about the soul, about returning to the one who created you, about a Lord whose name was Ar-Rahman, the most merciful, and Ar-Rahim, the especially merciful. I didn't understand much that night. I didn't convert. I didn't suddenly become a believer. But something undeniable had happened. I had turned my face, even slightly, toward a direction I'd spent my whole life walking away from. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling once more. The same ceiling that had heard my childhood accusation, "If you're really there," now watched a man who wasn't sure what he believed anymore, only that his old certainty was bleeding out. I used to think miracles were just good timing with a poetic twist. But that was before everything I believed about control, logic, and chance began to fall apart right in front of me. The cancer had spread, slowly, stubbornly, like ink through water. My doctor spoke gently, but his eyes said what his words didn't. Time was running out. Treatments were no longer fighting the disease, they were only delaying its victory. At first, I reacted like I always had. I told myself I'd fight it with reason, with science, with determination. But determination doesn't stop cells from multiplying. It doesn't heal pain that wakes you in the night, or stop the weight loss that makes your own reflection a stranger's face. I remember the night it all came crashing down. The city outside my apartment window glowed like it always did, too bright, too loud, too alive. But inside, I was trembling, drenched in sweat, barely able to breathe. The pain in my chest had turned sharp, unrelenting. I collapsed to the floor, clutching at nothing. I didn't call anyone. I didn't pray, not at first. I just lay there, half-conscious, my thoughts blurring into panic. And then, from somewhere deep, from a place I thought I'd sealed off forever, words broke through. Not in English, not in any language I'd ever spoken before. Ya Allah, help me. I didn't even know what it meant fully then. I'd only heard Muslims say it in moments of pain or relief, in movies, in passing. But the sound of it left my mouth like a truth older than I was. And in that moment, the pain eased. Not gone, not completely, but eased enough for me to breathe again. Enough to sit up, my tears mixing with sweat, my whole body shaking. Was it adrenaline? Coincidence? A trick of the mind? Maybe. But something inside me whispered, no. This was mercy. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to analyze it. I just sat there, whispering the word again and again. Allah, Allah. The name filled the empty room like a heartbeat. A few days later, I went back to the hospital for another round of tests. I walked slower now, but lighter somehow. In the waiting room, I saw Layla the nurse, with the gentle voice who used to whisper prayers under her breath. She smiled when she saw me. "You look different today," she said. I hesitated. "I," said his name. I confessed quietly. That night, when I thought I was dying. Her eyes softened, and how did it feel? I searched for the words, like I wasn't alone. She nodded. "You weren't." That night, she brought me a small gift, a tiny, well-worn book with English on one side and Arabic on the other. "It's a translation of the Qur'an," she said. "You don't have to read it all. Just start anywhere." I laughed awkwardly. "You're trying to convert me on my deathbed?" She smiled, not defensive, not pushy, just kind. "No, I'm giving you something that helped me live." The first page I opened to wasn't random, though I told myself it was. My eyes landed on a verse that said, "And when my servants ask you concerning me, indeed, I am near. I respond to the call of the supplicant when he calls upon me." Quran 2-186. I stared at the words until they blurred. Something broke open in me, something that had been locked since that night. I was 12, standing in my room, asking the ceiling if anyone was listening. All this time, I'd been shouting into the void. But what if it was never a void? What if I had simply never learned how to listen back? Days turned into weeks. I began to read a few verses each morning. Not like research, not like evidence to argue with, just reading. And every verse felt like someone speaking directly into the quiet places I'd hidden. I learned that Allah wasn't a different God. It was simply the Arabic word for the same creator I'd spent my life denying. That Muslims believed in prophets I already knew. Abraham, Moses, Jesus, peace be upon them all. That Islam didn't ask me to erase my past, it asked me to understand it. And strangely, my fear of death started to change. Not disappear, but soften. Because for the first time, I didn't feel like death was the end of something meaningless. I started to see it as a return. My doctor was surprised when the scans showed signs of remission. The tumors had shrunk significantly. "It's remarkable," he said, flipping through the images again and again. We weren't expecting this kind of response. I just smiled, too tired to explain what I knew deep down. I didn't call it a miracle out loud, but I whispered, "Alhamdulillah, praise be to God," under my breath. Layla found me later, sitting by the hospital window, light spilling across the floor. She asked quietly, "Would you like to visit the mosque with me? This Friday? Just to listen." I hesitated. The word mosque still felt foreign, heavy, but something in me said yes before my fear could say no. That Friday, I sat at the back of a small masjid in downtown Los Angeles. The air smelled faintly of sandalwood and clean carpet. Men stood in straight rows. When the call to prayer began, the sound wrapped around me like something alive. Allahu Akbar. God is greater, greater than pride, greater than pain, greater than everything I'd built my life upon. As they bowed and pressed their foreheads to the ground, something in me wanted to follow, to surrender in a way I never had, not to weakness, but to truth. When the prayer ended, Layla introduced me to the Imam, a soft-spoken man with kind eyes. I told him I wasn't sure why I was there, only that I felt drawn to something I couldn't explain. He smiled and said, "Sometimes the heart recognizes what the mind denies." We talked for a long time about the faith, mercy, forgiveness, about how, no matter how far you run, the door back to God never closes. And then, as the sun began to set, he asked gently, "Michael, do you believe there is only one God, and that Muhammad is his final messenger?" My throat tightened, tears blurred my vision. All the years of arrogance, anger, searching, they all led to this quiet moment. "Yes," I whispered, "I do." He smiled. "Then repeat after me." And I did, slowly, trembling. "Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasul Allah." I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. The words left my lips like light escaping a long closed room. I felt something I can't explain, like every burden I'd ever carried was being lifted one by one until I could finally breathe again. It wasn't euphoria. It wasn't relief. It was peace, quiet, deep, absolute peace. The kind I'd been chasing my whole life in. Applause, in success, in denial. I didn't leave Hollywood in a single dramatic moment. There was no press conference, no viral post, no statement that said, "I'm done." It happened quietly. The same way faith had once slipped out of my fingers as a child, now it slipped back into my heart as a man. Only this time, I chose to follow it. After I took my shahada in that small masjid, the world outside didn't change. The city was still loud. The industry was still hungry. My contracts and obligations still existed, but I changed. The first difference was in my mornings. Before Islam, mornings were just the blurry time between dragging myself out of bed and my first cup of coffee. Now, I woke up before dawn to the soft insistence of my alarm, the world outside still sleeping. The first time I stood for Fajr, my body ached, my joints protested, and every movement felt awkward. I didn't know all the Arabic words yet. My recitation was broken, uneven. But when I bowed and pressed my forehead to the prayer mat for the first time, really knowing who I was bowing to, something in me exhaled in a way it never had before. For the first time in my life, putting my head down didn't feel like defeat. It felt like coming home. Hollywood didn't know what to do with the new me. At first, I didn't tell many people. A few close friends knew I was exploring spirituality. My parents only knew that I was getting closer to God again, and even that was a miracle in their eyes. Telling them I was Muslim became another journey of its own. I'll be honest, I was afraid to see disappointment in their faces, afraid they'd see my choice as a rejection of everything they'd tried to give me. But when I finally sat in their living room, hands shaking slightly as I said, "Mom, Dad, I've become a Muslim," the world didn't end. My mom cried, "Yes." My dad sat very still. There were questions, fears, misunderstandings. But beneath all of that, there was something I hadn't expected. Relief. Relief that their son, who'd spent a lifetime running from God, had finally decided to run toward him, even if the path looked different from theirs. "Do you believe in God now?" my mother asked through her tears. "Yes," I said simply. "I believe in Allah, in one God, and I believe He's been patient with me for a very long time." She didn't understand all the details. She didn't have to. She just held my hand and whispered, "Then I'm glad you're not alone anymore." In Hollywood, the shift was more complicated. Offers still came in. Scripts to punch up, projects about religion they wanted my unique perspective on. Some people had heard rumors that I'd become religious and thought it would make for a great marketing angle. A few suggested I write a biting, ironic comedy about a famous atheist who converts to a strict religion, complete with all the stereotypes and easy jokes. The old version of me would have taken that pitch and run. The new me smiled politely and said, "I don't want to make a joke out of something that finally gave me peace." Slowly, I pulled back. Not overnight, not dramatically, just less yes, more no. I turned down stories that mocked faith, any faith. I stopped going on panels, where the whole point was to tear down believers for entertainment. I watched as the invitations shifted, then slowed. Hollywood doesn't hate you when you stop feeding it. It just forgets you. But I found I didn't mind being forgotten, because while one world dimmed, another deep, quiet world opened. I spent more time at the masjid. I learned to recite Al-Fatiha properly, stumbling over the sounds until they became part of me. I sat with older men who'd been Muslim longer than I had been alive, listening to them talk about patience, about trust, about Qadr, the divine decree. I read about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi, about how he was mocked, rejected, driven out, but never once abandoned the one who sent him. I'd walk out of the masjid with my shoes in my hand, feeling the coolness of the tiled floor under my feet, the faint smell of incense in the air, and I'd think, if I'd found this earlier, what kind of man could I have been? Then another thought would come, gentler. Allah guided me when He knew I was finally ready, not a second before, not a second too late. My health never went back to what it was before cancer. There were good months, lighter months, the remarkable remission the doctors talked about like a surprise guest they didn't expect at the party. I gained some weight back, got some color in my face, even felt, at times, almost normal. But beneath it all, I knew this was borrowed time, a mercy, not a reset. And because I knew that, I started treating time differently. Instead of measuring my days by meetings and deadlines, I measured them by prayers, by Qur'an pages, by small moments of change inside me, anger that faded faster than it used to, ego that softened when I caught it flaring, apologies I finally made to people I'd hurt in my old life. I tried, in my clumsy, late way, to become a better son, a better friend, a better neighbor. I didn't become an angel. I didn't suddenly turn into a saint. I was still stubborn, still impatient, still flawed. But for the first time, I knew where to take those flaws, to Allah. The cancer coming back didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like an appointment finally being kept. The scans showed new shadows. The language shifted again. Progression, limited options, focus on quality of life. This time, the words didn't hit me like a truck. They landed like something I had already, in a way, prepared for. I sat with the news in a small consultation room, fingers tracing the edge of the paper on the desk, and thought, so this is it. This is the chapter where the story really ends. Only, it didn't feel like an ending anymore. It felt like a transition. When my doctor asked what I wanted to do, more aggressive treatments, clinical trials, experimental therapies that might buy me time at the cost of everything else, I surprised both of us. I don't want to spend whatever I have left chasing more time, I said quietly. I want to spend it preparing to use the time after. He didn't understand what I meant, not fully, but I did. And Allah did. That was enough. And so we circle back to where I began this story. A hospital bed in Los Angeles, the antiseptic smell, the quiet beeping of machines, the weight on my chest that makes every breath a negotiation. Only this time, I am not the man who believes in nothing. I am not the man who laughs at prayers and calls death the final blackout. I am a servant who knows his Lord's name. There are days when the pain is sharp and relentless, and all I can do is whisper, Ya Allah, give me patience. There are nights when fear creeps in the humankind, the kind that remembers every sin, every harsh word, every arrogant joke I ever made about him, and I lie awake, reciting, Rabbi, I fearly my Lord, forgive me, over and over until sleep finally comes. Sometimes Layla visits, the same nurse who once whispered dua over my IV drip without me understanding. She adjusts my pillow, asks how I'm feeling, and we share small moments of silence that feel like their own kind of worship. I remember the first time you said his name, she tells me one evening. The sky outside blushing with sunset. You were still fighting it, even as you called on him. I smile. My voice is thin now, but it's steady. I'm not fighting anymore. There's a small Qur'an on the bedside table. Some days, my hands are too weak to hold it for long, so I listen instead. Recitation plays softly from a little speaker verses I don't fully understand in Arabic, but that my heart recognizes anyway. One verse always catches me, every time it comes. And to Allah we belong, and to Him we shall return. As a child, I thought death was a brutal theft. As an atheist, I thought it was a blank screen. As a Muslim, I see it now as going back to the one who created me, watched me deny Him, and still, out of mercy, guided me before my last breath. I used to think my biggest achievement was having my name on billboards and movie posters. Now, as I lie here with my name on a hospital chart, I understand that the greatest honor I ever received was being able to say, even once, sincerely, La ilaha illa Allah, Muhammadur Rasul Allah. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. If you're listening to this, wherever you are in the world, I need you to know this. I am not telling you this story to insult your path, your background, or your doubts. I'm telling you this because I spent a lifetime running from God, and yet He still met me with gentleness. This story is inspired by true events. It's told with deep respect for all faiths, and meant only to share one man's journey toward finding peace in Islam. From which country are you watching this video? Subscribe to this channel if you love Islam. I don't know how many breaths I have left as I say this. The doctors have their estimates. My body has its own language of endings. But I know something now that I never knew sitting in those bright studios, trading jokes about religion for applause. I know where I'm going. I know who I'm returning to. The boy in the small-town church, the angry teenager in the movie theater, the arrogant writer on the red carpet, the broken man on the chemo chair, all of them led here, to this bed, to this peace. The machine beside me hums steadily. My chest rises and falls, slower now. The light through the problems. Window is soft, golden, like a curtain gently closing. My lips move one more time, quietly, instinctively, with all the strength I have left. La ilaha illa Allah, Muhammadur Rasul Allah. No God but Allah. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. And as the sound of my own breath fades, for the first time in my life, I am not afraid of the dark.